He called you to him in the morning, in front of everyone. He said one word, go. He did not say why. He did not need to. You both knew why. Everyone knew why. No one said anything. You went. Before we begin, this is the second story. If you have not heard the first one, here is what you need to know. A look on a path. Hands touching over a pile of gathered wood. A sleepless night. A full moon. A woman sitting beside you in the cold, and both of you looking at the same moon and nothing happening and everything beginning. Nothing happened. This is still true, but something was seen or sensed or suspected, and in a tribe of 23 people, there are no private things. The chief knew. How chiefs know these things is not complicated. They watch. Watching is most of what power is. This morning, he called you to him. One word, and the world that you have lived inside your entire life closed behind you like water closing over a stone. In this story, you are the one who was sent away. This is your forest. This is what it teaches you. You were eating when he called you. Morning, the fire still burning from the night, the tribe moving through the first tasks of the day. You were sitting at the edge of the group with your food, watching the light come through the trees, the way it came every morning. The particular angle of early autumn sun that turned everything briefly golden before settling into ordinary daylight. He said your name. Not loudly. He never needed to speak loudly. There was a quality to his voice that made people hear it regardless of the volume. Something in the register of it. The weight. You heard it across the camp. The way you would hear your name in a storm. Clearly, unmistakably, you looked up. He was standing near the center of the camp, where the chief stood when something needed to be addressed in front of everyone. Not sitting, not crouching, standing, full height. This positioning was itself a message in the language of bodies that your tribe had been speaking since before anyone now alive had been born. You put down your food. You stood. You walked toward him. The camp had gone quiet. This happened when the chief stood in the center. The conversation stopped, the tasks paused, the attention turned. 22 people watching. You felt each pair of eyes as a physical weight. You stopped in front of him. You looked at him. He looked at you. His face gave nothing. It never gave anything. This was one of his qualities as a leader. The face that did not show what was happening behind it, that forced everyone around him to watch and guess and stay slightly uncertain. He said one word, go. That was all. That in 23 words your world could have ended. He used one. This was a choice, and the choice told you something. He was not explaining, because explanation would require evidence, and evidence would require accusation, and accusation would make the thing real in a way that one word did not. One word was clean. One word let him remain certain and you remain guilty and the tribe remain intact. One word was the most efficient possible ending. You understood all of this in the moment it took him to say it. You had always been quick to understand things. It had never helped you less. You did not argue. There was nothing to argue with. One word is not an argument, it is a fact. And you had nothing to offer against the fact except your own version of the truth, which no one was asking for, and which would only make things worse. You went to your things. You had a sleeping skin, a water vessel, a small knife made of worked flint, a spare piece of leather cord. These were your possessions, everything you owned in the world, and they fit inside a bundle you could carry with one arm. You picked up the bundle. You turned. 22 people were looking at you, some with the careful, neutral expressions of people who had decided not to have an expression, some with something that might have been pity in different circumstances, but was not quite pity here, but more like the recognition that what was happening to you could happen to anyone, had happened before, would happen again. You looked for her. She was at the back of the group, half behind the older woman, who always stood at the edge of things. Her face was very still, not the chief's stillness, which was controlled and calculated, a different kind, the stillness of someone who is holding something in with both hands. Your eyes met for 1 second. Her expression did not change. Neither did yours. There was nothing to express that would not make everything worse for everyone. You looked away. You walked toward the trees. No one followed. No one called after you. You did not look back. The forest took you in. Exile is not a single moment. The moment of leaving is only the surface of it. The real exile happens inside, quietly, over the hours and days that follow, as you understand piece by piece the full dimensions of what you have lost. The tribe, the fire, the people you have known your whole life. The sense of being held inside something larger than yourself. These things dissolve, slowly. The forest does not rush the understanding. It simply waits. You walked until the sounds of the camp were gone. This took longer than you expected. Sound carries in still autumn air, the voices and movements of 22 people doing the morning's work, and you kept hearing fragments of it, for a long time after the trees had closed behind you and the camp was out of sight. The old woman's cough. A child. The sound of something being struck against stone. Then nothing. The forest. You had been in this forest many times. You knew its edges well, the hunting grounds, and the water sources, the paths the animals used, but you had never been in it like this. Always before there had been others, a hunting group, a gathering party, someone beside you. The forest with others is a different thing from the forest alone. The trees were the same trees. The light between them was the same light. The smell of dead leaves and cold earth and resin was familiar. But the silence had a different quality. It pressed on you from every direction. It had weight. You walked north, not because north was better than any other direction, but because north was away from the camp, and or was all you knew to do. The ground rose slowly. The trees changed, the lower birch and ash giving way to older oak, the canopy thickening, the light on the forest floor dimmer and greener. And your footsteps on the leaf litter were loud in the silence. Every snapped twig was enormous. You had been alone in the forest for perhaps half a day when the first real fear came. Not fear of anything specific, fear of the scale of it. The forest in every direction, the same in every direction. The tribe behind you and nothing ahead of you, and the sky shrinking to a narrow strip above the canopy. You stopped walking. You stood. You breathed. Fear is useful. This is something hunters know, and something you knew but had never needed to apply to yourself. Fear sharpens the attention. Fear makes the body quick and the senses sharp. The problem with fear is that it wants to run, and running in a forest with no destination is how people die. You stood still and let the fear do what it needed to do, and then you continued walking. North. Still north. When the light began to fail, you looked for a place to sleep. On the ground was not possible. Not alone. Not on the first night. Not without fire. You had no way to make fire without the tools back at camp, without the practiced ease of the group working together. A fire required time and dry material, and 2 sets of hands, and none of those things were available. The ground without fire meant the cold, and the cold meant danger, and the dark meant the animals that owned the dark. You found a tree, an old oak, very large, the first major branch high but reachable. You climbed, your arms and legs knew climbing. The tribe climbed for fruit and for lookout and for the pleasure of height, and your body found the rhythm of it without needing to think. Up the trunk, rough bark under your palms and the soles of your feet, then the first branch, then higher, then a fork where 2 large branches met and made a space wide enough to wedge yourself into. You wedged yourself in. The forest below was already dark. The light gone from the lower levels while the canopy of still caught something of the fading sky. You could see perhaps 20 feet in any direction, shapes only, the pale trunks of the birches ghostly in the failing light. You were cold. The sleeping skin helped, but the branch was hard underneath you, and the night air found every gap in your covering, and the sounds of the night forest started up around you. The rustles and calls and the distant sound of something moving through undergrowth that was either small or far away, and you chose to believe both. You did not sleep for a long time. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and broken, the kind of sleep that rests the body slightly while the mind stays half alert, ears working even when the eyes are closed. You woke several times. Each time the forest was dark and the sounds were different, and you lay still in the fork of the oak and breathed and waited for morning. The first night alone is the longest night, not because it is actually longer, because it has no before and no after that you trust. Behind you is the life that expelled you. Ahead is nothing yet. You are in the middle with the dark on all sides and the tree holding you up and your own heartbeat the loudest sound you can hear. You survive this night. This is the only achievement required of you. You survive it. Morning came, gray and slow and cold. You climbed down. You kept moving. On the second day, hunger arrived properly. You had not eaten since the morning in the camp, the food you put down when the chief called your name. That was yesterday. The body can manage this. You knew how to manage this. Fasting was not unknown. There had been lean days before. But the body makes its needs known regardless of what the mind knows about managing them. And by midday of the second day, the hunger was a presence, constant and insistent, located somewhere behind the sternum. You needed to eat. You had the knife. You had your hands and your knowledge of the forest. You had hunted many times. This was the skill you were most confident in. You found tracks. A deer, by the size and shape, not old tracks, perhaps from early morning. You followed them. You followed them slowly, the way you had been taught, matching your pace to the forest's pace, stepping carefully, testing the wind. The deer was there. A young one, alone, grazing at the edge of a small clearing. You saw it before it saw you. This was the first requirement of hunting, and you had met it. You moved closer, slowly, using the trees, keeping the wind in your face. The knife was in your hand. It was a short knife, a tool as much as a weapon, and hunting with a knife meant getting very close. You had done this before, with others, coordinating using the group. Alone it was different. Alone there was no one to cut off the escape route, no one to drive the animal toward you, no one to make the second strike if the first one failed. You were 10 feet away when it heard you. The head came up. The ears turned. For one moment you were both completely still, looking at each other across the narrow distance. And then it was gone, bounding away through the trees with a speed that made the attempt feel foolish. You stood in the clearing and watched it disappear. The hunger behind your sternum did not comment. It simply continued. Failure in the forest is not a disgrace. It is information. The deer heard you, which means you were not quiet enough, which means you need to be quieter. This is the forest's teaching method. It does not explain. It simply shows you the gap between what you think you can and what you actually can do. Alone, these gaps are visible in a way they never are inside a group, where other people's competence fills in for your own without you ever noticing. You kept moving. There would be another chance. There had to be another chance. The second night you slept on the ground. Not by choice. Exhaustion made the choice. By the time the light failed, you had been moving for 2 days with almost no sleep and no food, and the body simply stopped negotiating. You found a place between the roots of a large tree, the roots making a partial enclosure, the dead leaves deep enough to provide some insulation. You pulled your sleeping skin tight. You lay down. The cold was serious now. Autumn was moving toward its harder self, and the nights were dropping to temperatures that the body could manage but not ignore. You lay and shivered and watched the stars appear in the gaps in the canopy above you. The stars were extraordinary. You had seen them before, of course, thousands of times, but always from the camp, always with the fire nearby, always surrounded by other people. Here, there was nothing between you and them. The full depth of the sky, layer after layer of light, the great river of stars that ran from one horizon to the other, more stars than you had ever thought to count. You lay shivering and looked at them for a long time. You thought about the tribe, specifically and in detail. The faces, the voices, the exact position of each person's sleeping place. The old man near the entrance, the children, the fire. You thought about her. You thought about whether what had happened was worth what it had cost. The look on the path, the hands on the branch, the full moon and the silence. These things felt very small and very large simultaneously, the way things feel when you examine them alone in the dark with nothing else to look at. You did not arrive at an answer. The stars did not offer one. And the cold continued. Hunger and cold and solitude do something to the mind. They strip away the comfortable layers, the assumptions and certainties that daily life builds up around you, and leave something smaller and more honest. You lying on the cold ground under the stars are not the same person who sat beside her in the moonlight. That person had the warmth of the fire nearby and the shape of the world around him. This person has only the night and the question of whether he will survive it. On the third day you ate, not deer, something smaller, a rabbit, found in a thicket in the mid-morning, frozen for one moment in the open before it ran. Your knife found it before it reached cover. And the kill was fast and messy, and you sat with it in your hands for a moment, feeling something that was not quite pride and not quite relief and not quite grief, but contained something of all three. You ate it raw. There was no fire. Raw meat is not pleasant, but it is food, and food is warmth and strength and the continuation of everything. And your body received it with an urgency that bypassed any consideration of preference. Afterward, you sat against a tree and felt the warmth begin to spread through you. Small warmth, the warmth of a small animal, not enough and better than nothing. Your hands had stopped shaking slightly. Your thinking had cleared. You looked at the forest around you. For 2.5 days you had been moving through it as though it were an obstacle, something to push through on the way to somewhere else. There was nowhere else. This was where you were, and now fed and slightly warmer you looked at it differently. It was very beautiful. The old trees, enormous and patient, their bark gray and deeply textured, roots finding the rock beneath the soil. The light between them moving with the breeze, dappled and shifting. A bird somewhere nearby, calling the same 4 notes over and over, not urgently, simply as a statement of presence. Mushrooms at the base of a fallen log, rust red and perfect. You had been alive for all of this and had never quite seen it. The forest does not care about you. This is not cruelty. It is simply the truth of what a forest is. It was here before you, and it will be here after you, and your presence in it registers as no more significant than the rabbit's presence or the bird's. This indifference is strangely and a relief. The tribe cared about you in the way that tribes care about their members, which includes expecting things from you and judging you against those expectations. The forest expects nothing. It simply is. In the forest, you can simply be. On the 4th day, you built a shelter, not because you had decided to stay. You had not decided anything about the future. But the sky had been telling you something all morning. The particular gray of it, the heaviness, the way the air smelled of what was coming. Rain, real rain, not an afternoon shower, but the sustained, cold, determined rain of autumn that could last for days. You knew how to build a shelter. Everyone in the tribe knew. The knowledge was passed from the older ones to the younger the way all essential knowledge was passed through doing it together, through being shown. You had built shelters before, with others the work divided and efficient. Alone it was slower. You chose a place where 2 trees grew close together, using them as the main supports. You cut branches with your knife, the longest you could manage, and leaned them against the trees at an angle. Then smaller branches across those, then leaves and bark, layered thickly, working from the bottom up the way you had been shown. Your hands were slow with cold, and the knife was not made for this work, and by the time the rain began, you had something that was partly a shelter. The rain found the gaps. You sat inside your partly shelter, and the rain came through in 3 places. Slow drips that found your shoulders and the back of your neck with a persistence that felt almost personal. You shifted. The drips found you again. You sat there for a long time. The rain came down steadily, drumming on the leaves above you, rushing through the canopy, turning the forest floor to a pattern of dark, wet, and pale dry. The sound of it was enormous. You had never been alone in rain before. But you were out of the wind, and you were not on open ground, and the worst of the rain was hitting the leaves above you rather than your skin. This was not a good shelter. It was better than nothing, which in the forest was the only standard that applied. What you build alone is never as good as what you build with others. This is not a failure of skill. It is the fundamental truth of what groups are for. A shelter built by 4 people in 2 hours is warmer and drier than a shelter built by 1 person in 4 hours. The group is not just company. The group is competence, accumulated and shared. You are only now understanding the full weight of what you left behind. The rain continued. You stayed dry enough. This was enough. Days passed. You stopped counting them. This surprised you when you noticed it. Back in the tribe, the days had a structure, the morning tasks and the evening meal and the fire at night, and the passage of time was marked by these structures. In the forest, the days were marked differently, by hunger and its satisfaction, by cold and the finding of warmth, by the quality of light in the morning and the direction of the wind and the sounds the animals made at different hours. You were learning, not quickly, not gracefully. You made mistakes that cost you time and energy, and once a small cut on your hand from a moment of inattention with the knife, bound up with a piece of bark, healing slowly, but you were learning. The rabbit had not been the last kill. You had found others, smaller animals, a method developing through trial and error, a patience growing in you that had not been there before. The forest rewarded patience in a way the tribe had not prepared you for. In the tribe, patience was one quality among many. In the forest, patience was everything. The animal that was not there at midday was there at dawn. The path that seemed impassable in summer was different in autumn. The forest moved on its own schedule, and your schedule was irrelevant. You adjusted your schedule. The shelter improved, not in one effort but in many small ones, another layer of bark, a better arrangement of the branches, a way of banking dead leaves against the base to stop the cold coming up from the ground. It still let in wind. It was better. At night you lay in it and looked at the stars through the gaps in the roof and thought about many things. Some nights you thought about the tribe. Some nights you thought about her. Some nights you thought about nothing at all. Just the stars and the cold and the small sounds of the forest settling around you. Solitude is not silence. The forest is full of sound, the constant conversation of things living and growing, and hiding. Solitude is the absence of human sound, the absence of voices and footsteps and the specific quality of attention that other people bring. In this absence, you begin to hear other things, not just the forest, yourself, the part of you that is always covered over by the noise of living with others. You found them by accident, or they found you. In the forest, the distinction is not always clear. You were moving along a stream bed, following the water the way you had learned to follow it because water led to animals and animals led to food. And you came around a bend in the stream, and there they were on the other bank. 3 of them. A man and 2 women crouched at the water's edge. They had been filling vessels, and when you appeared they went very still, the way prey goes still, watching. You went still too. You looked at each other across 6 feet of cold, moving water. They were dressed in skins, similar to yours. Their faces were cautious and alert. The man had something in his hand, a stick, not quite a weapon. His grip on it tightened slightly. You showed your hands, both of them, open, palms forward, empty. This gesture was not something you had been taught. It arrived from somewhere older than teaching, the body's oldest signal. I have nothing that will hurt you. The man looked at your hands. He looked at your face. His grip on the stick did not loosen, but he did not raise it. A long moment passed. Then, one of the women said something to the man, low and quick, in sounds that were not quite your language, but had a rhythm that was not entirely unfamiliar either. He listened. He looked at you again. He showed his hands. The moment two strangers decide not to be afraid of each other is one of the oldest moments in human history. It has happened 1,000,000 times, on every continent, across every era, whenever two people from different groups found themselves unexpectedly close. Something is assessed, something is decided, and the world becomes slightly larger. This is how the human world has always grown. Not through grand gestures, through two people on opposite banks of a stream choosing, in a single moment, not to run. You did not join them that day. You stayed on your side of the stream, and they stayed on theirs, and you communicated in the way that people communicate when they have no shared language, which is slowly, and with much repetition and with the hands doing most of the work. You learned that they were camped somewhere to the east. You learned, or believed you learned, that they had been in this part of the forest for some time. They learned where you had come from, approximately, in the sense that you pointed in the direction of the tribe, and they seemed to understand that you had come from there and were no longer with them. The woman who had spoken to the man was younger than the other, quick-eyed, the one who did most of the communicating from their side. She was not afraid of you. This was clear early. She watched you with open curiosity, the way a person watches something they find interesting rather than threatening. You came back the next day. They were there, and, the day after, they were there, again. The stream between you shrank in significance each time. On the 3rd day you crossed it. On the 4th, they came to your side. By the 5th day you had sat together around a fire and eaten together, and the fire was something they had made, because they had the tools and the practice, and you had neither, and the warmth of it was something you had not felt since the morning in the camp when you put down your food and stood up and walked toward the chief. The fire. You sat beside it and felt the heat on your face, and something in you that had been held tightly for many days that released slightly. Not all the way, but slightly. Enough. A tribe is not a group of people who were born together or who look the same or who have always known each other. A tribe is a group of people who have decided, together, to survive together. This decision can happen slowly, over many fires and many shared meals and many mornings of working beside each other. Or it can happen quickly when circumstances make it obvious. You are learning to decide. They are learning to decide. The forest waits. They were not good hunters. This became clear within a few days. They knew the forest. They knew its plants and its rhythms and the location of water. And the women were skilled gatherers, returning each day with things to eat that you would have walked past without recognizing. But the hunting was poor. The man went out each morning and returned most mornings with nothing, occasionally with something small. The group ate enough, but not well. There was a thinness to them. Not starvation, but a leanness that spoke of many meals that were barely sufficient. You watched him hunt once. He was patient, which was good, but he moved wrong. His weight too far forward, his approach too direct. The animals heard him before he was close enough. You recognized this because it was the mistake you had made yourself on the first day with the deer. You had learned from it. He had not had anyone to learn from. You showed him. Not with words. There were still not enough shared words for instruction. With Demonstration. You moved through the forest in the way you had learned, the weight back, the feet finding the soft ground, the pauses when the wind shifted. He watched. He copied. The copying was imperfect at first and then less imperfect. That afternoon you hunted together and came back with 2 animals. The women cooked them. Everyone ate well. The young woman with the quick eyes watched you across the fire with an expression that you had learned to read as approval, which in this group seemed to be expressed through directness of gaze rather than sound or gesture. Yet you sat by their fire and ate, and the forest was dark on all sides, and above the smoke, the stars were out and you were not alone. What you know is worth something. This seems obvious, and yet it is the thing that the forest teaches last. Because in solitude, what you know barely keeps you alive, and barely alive is not a condition that makes you feel like you have anything worth offering. But you do. You have things these people do not have, and they have things you do not have, and this is exactly the reason why groups form and grow and survive. The forest has been teaching you this for weeks without using words. Some nights later, sitting by the fire, you thought about the tribe, not with the sharp pain of the first days. That pain had dulled to something more like a bruise, present when pressed but no longer constant. But you could think about the camp, the faces, the morning sounds, without the feeling cutting you the way it had cut you in the beginning. You thought about the chief, the single word, the 22 people watching. You thought about her, the look on the path, the hands on the wood, the moonlight and the silence, and the nothing that was everything. These things felt farther away than the forest around you, not less real. Farther. You had been changed. This was the simplest way to say it. The forest had done something to you that no other experience had done. It had shown you the size of yourself, which was smaller than you had thought, and the size of what you were capable of, which was larger. These 2 things together made a different person from the one who had put down his food and stood up that morning in the camp. So the young woman with the quick eyes was awake on the other side of the fire. She was working on something with her hands in the firelight, a piece of cord, a pattern. She did not look up, but she said something, one of the sounds you had learned by now, a short word that in her language meant something close to, "How are you?" or perhaps just the acknowledgement of another person's presence. You were not entirely sure of the difference. You answered with the same word. She looked up then. The quick eyes, the direct gaze, not like the look on the path, different. Something more like the look you got from a person who had decided you were trustworthy and was not going to pretend otherwise. You looked back. You had been sent away from one world and found yourself at the edge of another. You had not chosen this, but here you were, alive, fed, beside a fire, among people who had decided not to be afraid of you. The world that cast you out is still there, to the south, carrying on without you. And you are here, carrying on without it. Both things are true. Neither cancels the other. You are becoming someone who can hold 2 true things at once without needing to resolve them. The fire burned lower. The stars turned somewhere in the dark forest. The night went on doing what nights do. You were still here. This, for now, was enough. A note on history. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that movement between Stone Age groups was common and sometimes forced. Individuals were expelled from groups, captured by others, or chose to leave. The mixing of genetic material across early human populations indicates a significant degree of contact and integration between different groups. Exile as a social mechanism, the removal of a disruptive member without physical harm, appears to be among the oldest forms of social regulation. It requires a level of social sophistication, the ability to identify a threat to group cohesion and respond to it in a way that preserves the group without resorting to violence. What happened to exiled individuals in the Paleolithic period depended on the environment, the season, and the individual's skills. Some would not have survived. Others would have found new groups, as happens in this story. Genetic research suggests that many did exactly this. The small group in this story are not based on any specific archaeological find, but groups of this size, living in forested environments in what is now northern Europe during the Upper Paleolithic, certainly existed. Their lives were difficult, and their skills were considerable. This series continues. The exile is not the end of the story. It is where the story actually begins. Good night.